Hello and welcome to the 2 Cent Table, the podcast where people bring their 2 cents to the table. I'm Darren Bridges and I host this podcast with my mother, Carol Bridges. In the podcast's current state, the majority of these episodes will probably feature guests from our city of Moses Lake and the surrounding area. We'll generally try to keep topics interesting to listeners everywhere, but there may be times when we discuss our city, county, and state specifically. Today, we're talking about video games. My brother Darren is a game designer at Sucker Punch Productions.
You know, if you do 3 play tests and you find out which one makes the most money, is that what's best for the players? Like, are they actually having fun?
His daughter Evelyn is also joining us.
Nobody knows it. I'll tell them, my dad's a game designer. What? That's so cool!
And my brother-in-law Ben is father to a preteen game enthusiast.
There's times where I've almost felt like a teen-rated game was a little more inappropriate in certain respects than a mature game.
We discuss the game production process, the benefits and shortcomings of gaming, viewing games from a parenting perspective, and many other such topics. And now it's time to listen in on the conversation at the 2 Cent Table.
Well, we're here today with Darren Bridges, Bejamin Hysjulien, Evelyn Bridges, and Brian and I. And we're going to talk about video games. Darren is a longtime video game player, and he is now a senior game designer with Sucker Punch, which is owned by Sony. Ben is probably a longtime game player. And over here we have Evelyn Bridges. Evie is 13 years old. She lives with Darren as his daughter, so she has been exposed to video games all her life. So I would like to hear from you, Darren, first, and it would be interesting to hear what is the process of building a video game? I know that's a complex question, so summarize how an idea turns into a game being played by a 13-year-old girl in Bellevue, Washington.
Oh, man, yeah. It is a complicated process. I often get people coming up to me and saying, so you make video games, huh? And I say, yeah. And they say, oh, so what do you do? Like, they don't have any idea of what the actual process is. And if you talk to a carpenter or someone who works on a house and they tell you they're a carpenter or plumber or whatever, you have an idea of, because you live in a house and you understand how the pieces of a house contribute to the total function. You can kind of deconstruct it, but people don't have that with video games a lot of times. So part of the answer is writing computer code to tell computers what to do, but there's all these little building blocks that build tools and all these other things that eventually create. I mean, video game characters are kind of like puppets that you can control, and then you build a simulation that kind of allows them to act and interact in certain ways, and then you have character artists, you create the characters, you have environment artists, you create the environment. So yeah, if you went to a video game studio, mostly it's everyone's working on computers. That's one common thread. But some people will be doing writing code. Some people will be writing documents or kind of doing production work. Some people will be recording audio or painting with their tablets, painting characters or painting environments.
You've been doing this how many years?
Professionally since 2003.
So about 15.
So 15 years,
15 years. What's changed in these 15 years that you've gotten to see?
I think the biggest change, I mean, there's been improving technology over time, but I think the biggest change has been the internet. So that changed a few things. It changed the way that like video games are released. So previous, when I started, we would make the code build, we'd send it off to the factories, they'd burn, 1 million discs, send them out to stores, and that was the end. We'd never do any more work on it again. I mean, we'd go do press and stuff for it, but we'd never edit the game again. But now games have kind of a shelf life and an ongoing online community, and people like you always release updates for games, and so the time when you release your game, that's just kind of, you're not really done. You're just kind of starting a new phase of work on it, where you're releasing updates or releasing new content or fixing bugs and sending patches, and everyone downloads them. And that's in the realm of games I work on, but also like mobile games weren't a thing when I was starting out, and now they're, the revenue from mobile industry is almost as high or has eclipsed home video games and PC games.
That surprises me, but
it's crazy.
that's why people are staring at their phones all the time?
Yes,
Part of it.
because they're putting money in it. It takes time to put money in your phone.
Yeah. Well, as a designer, what games stand out in your mind that you really, really enjoy playing? One, I'll ask you two questions. Which ones do you really enjoy playing? And then which ones do you just admire because of the way because you know what it takes to make the game?
Yeah, so, I mean, I play all kinds of games, and I like a lot of different types of games. The ones that, I've played a lot, and so the ones that stand out to me are, I use the word transcendent, the things that are transcendent in some way. So a game that has done something that I haven't, like provided an experience that I haven't had in any other game. Like one of the examples, the first Spider-Man game let you swing around a city as Spider-Man, and it was, it felt like a mix of skiing and snowboarding, and it was a very unique feeling when you play, and it was because you're swooping up and down over the city, and that was something that I had always had in my imagination when I read the comic books, but I'd never, it was like an embodiment of all the things that I'd imagined, and that was the first time I'd ever experienced it. But they made like 6 more Spider-Man games over the years after that, and the novelty of that just wears off over time. So, but then another game came out that was it was called Red Faction. I think I played, I don't know, it was one of the Red Faction games, but they had just a kind of a completely destructible city, so that you could go. It was an open world, and they had buildings, and you were the good guy somehow, and you're destroying all these buildings. But you could go take a sledgehammer and hit any building in any place, and the physical simulation would break. The building would break, and then if you did enough damage to the whole thing might fall down. And it felt the physics of it made it feel like a real simulation, feel like a real experience. So that was a transcendent moment where I felt like the game was cool, but even just the going and playing in the sandbox of, feeling like this is a simulation of physical reality, but I can go do things that I can't, and I could see how it would fall and all this stuff. So that's transcendent is the word I usually use for that. But the other thing I admire in games is when they are very pure, in the sense that they have a very clear vision for what they're trying to accomplish, and every part of it, from the menu to the user interface to the characters to the music, just supports that one. It's all very unified, because it's really hard to make a game fun. It's really hard. Games, you can make a movie. I mean, movies are hard to make too, I'm sure. I've never really done it. But with a game, it's an interactive simulation. So you're trying to create this thing that someone's going to go do whatever they want with. We often talk about, in video games, it's like the player is like a drunk actor, because you're trying to create a space for them to have this experience, but you can't control what they're going to do. And you have an idea of what they might do, but every player might approach something differently. So you're trying to funnel them into this having a cool moment or this experience, but they're going to, sometimes people will intentionally try and break it, or mess it up, or
Surely not.
yeah, or their baby's crying while they're playing. You're like, oh, the music's really going to get them into the moment, and their baby's crying or whatever. It's you don't have a really controlled environment like you do in a movie when you're making a movie.
Speaking of being a parent, what do you guys think about the direction that videos have taken with regards to YouTube and Let's Plays and kids watching kids play video games?
Do you do that, Ben?
We were actually just talking last night about the direction we think video games are are going and where we think they'll eventually end up being. And that's a tough thing to...
I'm sure almost every parent out there knows, because they probably have a kid that watches other kids play video games on YouTube.
And the interesting thing is so we have a 5-year-old, and he and of course we have our 12-year-old, and our 12-year-old for years has watched video games on YouTube. And there would be times, do you want to get this game? No, I've already played it. We don't have it. Well, I've played it on YouTube. I've watched the whole thing on YouTube. And so it's a very different experience for them. And here we are, we have a 5-year-old who didn't know our 12-year-old would do this, but our 5-year-old is now starting to watch YouTube playthroughs of games he doesn't even own yet. So there's obviously a phenomenon going on. Yeah, it is. Because it's nothing that he saw and is acting like his older brother, but yet here he is doing the same thing. So there's obviously something with them watching YouTube and playing through those games before they even actually own them. But the direction, I don't know. One thing we were talking about last night was just this huge online community that are playing some of these games where you're just playing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't necessarily understand what's going on with Fortnite. It's a big online community, and it's just people playing the same thing over and over again. And I was reading a few articles, and they're wondering if there isn't some kind of connection between this experience of almost gambling, kind of, because everybody's starting off at the same point. And you're just playing the same thing over and over again, hoping that you're going to land the right weapon, or you're going to land at the right place, and everything's just going to work out for you. So it's kind of a mix of luck and skill.
That's kind of how the MOBA games were, like League of Legends. It's the same game over and over and over, but you have your characters make the variety in your players. But
it's more like a sport, though.
Sports are the same thing over and over too. I don't get it.
Well, in that I don't. So you were talking about the gambling aspect, or the like, maybe this will be, and I guess every sport has that, but League of Legends and soccer and football and baseball, like the rules are the same, the fields are basically the same every time, but it's the interaction between your teammates and the interaction between your team and the other team and how that drama unfolds that makes it interesting.
How's that compared to Fortnite then?
So Fortnite, he was saying, like, Fortnite is a game where you throw 100 people into a map and it's just single elimination. Yeah, it's a free-for-all. But it's, you start far away from each other, and the space where you have to fight slowly gets smaller and smaller. So there's a couple of really interesting things about it. One is if you jump in, you start, and you kind of feel good no matter what, because you're almost never the first one killed. So there's
almost.
a clear, almost, I'm sure somebody's got to be the first one killed, but you feel like, you'll hide or run around, you won't see anybody, and then it'll say, oh, you were number, you get killed, and it's like, you were 85th. Like, I beat 15 people, and then the next time you do better, and I'm number 60, and and every time, like, the person who kills you, if you die, you see you're died, and then the camera switches to the person who kills you. So then you get to watch them, and maybe there's some honor in the person who kills you, maybe they make it to the top, So you're watching to see, well, maybe they were really good and that's why I died. Exactly. So you watch them, and then maybe someone kills them, and then the camera switches to the person, and eventually every time you join, you can see who ends up at the top.
And what they did and what got them there.
Yeah.
And try and recreate that yourself.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like learning skill, like that game, information in that game can spread virally, because every time you step in, you can watch the entire thing play out and see what techniques people used to get to the top.
They've taken playing video games and watching other people play video games, and they've turned it into its own.
That's really interesting, actually.
They've completely, it completely has converged, which I think is a really... if you're thinking about what will help a game do well in market, there's automatic marketing, and there's and it's the games are, the rounds are like 10 minutes, they're very short. And that's the thing you're talking about, is like people, like, if you die early, if you die in the first minute, you can jump into a new game. And then you're starting another one, like, oh, let's see how far I get this time. and it's just really
and
it's very addictive.
Level is irrelevant. So you could be playing against somebody that's been playing for months and months, and this is your first game, and you both start. He could be level 50, but it's irrelevant to what he starts the game with. So everybody starts completely
and everything.
Playing field.
It's all reset every time, except for your outfit. So you can play or buy or spend money to get fancier clothes and all this stuff. And that's another part of the marketing. Like every time you watch someone kill you, or you watch to see who wins the whole thing, you're like, oh, they have a cool hat or a cool whatever. Like it's automatic marketing,
even though it did absolutely nothing for them.
Yeah, it's not mechanically useful. It's just cool looking. So there's just this advertising. Oh, my peers have cooler stuff than me. Like that's enforced every game, and then I don't know.
I'm going to ask Evie a question. So you're a girl. Do you have girlfriends who play games, or do you feel like it's more of a boy sport? What do you think?
Well, I have friends who play it, but not really. Not a lot. It's mostly all my guy friends out there. So, yeah.
Are you more popular in the world because your dad's a game designer?
No. Nobody knows it. I'll tell them, my dad's a game designer. What? That's so cool. Like, they'll go on and on. What kind of games does he do? What's he working on now? Blah, 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 blah. So.
What do you play? What do you like?
Minecraft. I don't really play very many video games, so.
Are you good?
At Minecraft? Kind of.
Minecraft is its own class of video games.
Yeah.
In terms of the direction, what did you guys have? Do you have any thoughts about the whole argument between the fans and EA Games and the loot boxes and stuff? Actually, can you summarize that story?
Boy, I don't know if I have a ton of detail. I followed it loosely.
Well,
I know that loot boxes are very controversial.
The idea,
for many reasons.
The basic idea that people are frustrated with is this idea that you could pay real life money to make your character better and start winning online games. And the alternative is you could get to that level of your character, get those special upgrades, but the hours you have to put in to get that level of a character is like it's hundreds and hundreds of hours. Whereas people might just jump in and pay some money and they get him instantly. And they were frustrated by this because, for one, it just feels like such a money grab. And there was more details to that story, but the idea was that the fans had such a hostile reaction saying, we don't want this. And the game company said, basically, they tried to sort of make an appeal to fans and say, oh, we're listening to you, but they kind of just are going to do what they want. It's a different direction than, like you said, we used to just put in a disc and play the game. Then the game was over and you're done. But these days, with the online gaming and the endless downloadable content and bonus content, it's almost like a game gets made and then it'll last as long as they want it to last.
Yeah. Right.
They can put out as much content as they want, and you almost don't even have to work on a new game. You can just keep milking your own game for as long as people will pay money for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's strange, and I don't know what that's going to turn into.
One of the things we were talking about just last night actually was what does that do to the experience? Like I remember even growing up, you play a game and you become enveloped in the game. You're playing it and you almost get to the point where you're identifying with the character and the story's building and you're really you're enjoying playing the game versus almost this obsessive compulsive peer pressure behavior. Are they actually enjoying the game, or is it a peer pressure move? Which obviously for the company it's a money grab, and there's a loss of that just simply sitting back and enjoying a really good video game.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, yeah, especially in mobile games. Like mobile games have there's a wider audience, because everyone has a cell phone, but not everyone has a PS4, So if it's an audience you can tap into with games like Angry Birds or what's the fruit one?
Fruit Ninja?
No, well, yeah, but I was thinking the candy one, Candy Crush. And there's other ones too, but if you...
Candy isn't fruit, Darren.
That explains so much.
Same thing.
Yeah, if you can make something that has a mass appeal, then you have, 10 to 100 times the potential audience. And the other weird thing is that when you have that many people and you get all this information, you have big data that you can mine to see like, how do people respond to this content? And maybe like you can do things where you send one set of content out to a small group of your user base and another set of content to a different group, and you can see how they respond, like numerically. So you can say, does this, like if I add this power up, do they tend to buy that more? Or, do they tend to, like, what choices lead to us making more money? You can ask that question and find out directly, because you have such a wide group of users that you can instantly, like, you don't have to schedule a focus test. You don't have to get people in and ask their opinion. You can just send content out to different people and then see which one makes more money. And then you steer the company that way. So there's this really raw connection between getting information and acting on it immediately, and then just steering toward more money. And that's great, maybe, but it's it's kind of has no conscience. Like if you do 3 play tests and you find out which one makes the most money, is that what's best for the players? Like, are they actually having fun? Is it ethical? Who knows? Like, the metric is the bottom line, right? So, and you could still, if you're a video game designer or publisher or whatever, you could still ignore that and do, but the numbers are there. Like that, when that option is available to you, it's really hard to turn it down. And the other thing is, like, if you have people who have money and want to spend it, and they don't care about, they're fine with spending money on loot boxes, and a bunch of the players say, hey, we're annoyed that these people are doing this. Well, you already got there. If they're not people who are planning to spend more money on your games, then they could be annoyed, but they're not the ones like giving you money, So you have all these really weird decisions you have to make. And people are companies are handling them in all kinds of ways. And a lot of it, and companies don't really, there's no manual for how to do it or what will happen. A lot of it is kind of happening live, and people have to figure out what they're going to do. So it's complicated.
Kind of like franchises. McDonald's will try a new food in one area before they'll add it to their menu. Let's see what happens here. Who eats it? How much?
Yeah.
Hey, it's Brian here again. We'll be right back to continue with this episode, but I'd like to take a quick moment to share a bit about myself and my other work. This podcast is a side project I've started with the interest of learning about some of the people in our area to promote them and glean some knowledge from them. But my main work is video production. My business is Video Street Productions, and I make social media commercials for business, I film highlight videos of corporate events, and I've done mini documentaries and day-in-the-life videos. My goal with Video Street Productions is to make high-quality videos available to people and business owners outside of the larger metropolitan-type cities. If this is a service you could use, feel free to check out some of my work at video-street.com. That's dash as in the hyphen symbol. From there, you can learn more about pricing and details and contact me from the contact page. My work can also be found on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Search for Video Street Productions, or you can search for the hashtag VSPWA. And now let's return to the conversation at the 2 cent table.
So you've been in video games for about 15 years professionally. If I had a 12-year-old kid that was thinking they wanted to be a designer, what's the best advice that you would give him? Or her.
Or her.
Yeah,
hey, that'd be great. I think, have a plan B.
For every profession almost.
Yeah, I mean, the video game is very competitive, and a lot of people want to do it. And so the bar to get in is higher than it would be if it was,
And is it higher now than it was when you started?
It's hard to say. I feel like probably yes. In some ways, because the industry has matured, and so there's a lot more veteran people in the, 20 years ago there were no veteran people because the industry was just starting. And maybe that's not the right number, but you go far enough back. And also there's a lot of video game colleges and a lot of people who are studying specifically for it. There's the tech, the tools have gotten better, but also the bar of what people expect has gotten a lot higher. So the minimum amount of work to make a video game work is more. So what would I say to a kid? I would say, go to scratch.com or look it up, Scratch video games. Find a editor and start making stuff. Just start doing it. Like the tools are out there. I did. Well, yeah, I didn't have the tools that are available now, but I used Visual Basic, and I just sat in my room and wrote code, and I looked at magazines, and we didn't have the internet, and but I did whatever I could to download examples, and just do it now. Find a way to do it now. Like, don't wait for someone to come say, hey, we want you to give you a job. Find a way to do it now if you really want to do it, and then you'll see if you like it. And also, if you design specifically, there are no like junior designers, because if you're doing design, you're making decisions that are kind of leading the ship and steering the ship. So if I say, hey, we should make this enemy character, and we try it, people will test it, but that decision is going to mean that the character team is going to spend a bunch of time, like of their time, investing in it, and the AI team will spend a bunch of their time investing in it, and the visual effects team will spend. So my one decision is leading, 3 or 4 or 5 people to spend a week of their time. So that's a big gamble for a company. Like they need to be able to trust my decisions, that I'm reliable. And so it's hard for me to establish that reliability, that credibility, without having some experience or having something to show. Oh, I would say, like, design specifically, the other thing about design is that it's kind of hard to test and hard to demonstrate. If you're an artist, you can make art and show it, and it's very kind of, the art isn't exactly objective, but you can say, like, here's 10 examples or here's 100 examples, but a design portfolio is more
You
difficult.
started out as a programmer, right?
Right, yeah.
And what do you feel like, do you miss that at all, or you still do it?
I do some still, yeah, and I miss parts of it. I do more management and I do a broad variety of things. So it's not, the freedom is kind of challenging and exciting, but it is, it's kind of out the big blue ocean a lot more times, and more kind of uncertain and scary. Mm-hmm. Whereas if someone says, like, hey, we want you to make this, then you make it, and then you're done, and so you're like, I succeeded. But if I make, in a given day, I make, 3 or 4 decisions. I tell people, please go do this and go do this. I predict a production budget for here's how we should do this. And I go home and I'm like, I don't know if I'm right or not. And I don't know when I'll know if I'm right or not. There's no one. So it's just you get less of that quick reinforcement of, yeah, you did good, or yeah, you did well, and you punch it out. It's a lot more. So I miss that aspect of it, but I still get to do some coding, and that's fun.
Yeah. So now let's get a controversial subject here, and I'm going to ask Ben, because he has 2 little children and a 12-year-old. So people are talking about video games promoting violence, and they're fearful, and they're thinking there should be some laws and some rules. And you have young children, and as a parent, what are your thoughts? It's a big, broad question, but I'm going to just kind of say, what are your thoughts about this?
Specifically about just violence and those types of things in video games, or about rules and laws?
Well, I did ask a complicated question, so I'll start with, well, what do you think about the about the idea that video games promote violence within young people?
Obviously, I think there's something there. I mean, you can't sit there and look at, watch or control a situation where you're killing over and over again, and there isn't something that's programmed in your head somewhat. But I also wonder, I mean, it's probably, there is some good enjoyment and entertainment with that, but I do think oftentimes parents are a little bit quick to let their children grab a hold of a video game that was probably inappropriate. Children's minds are obviously, they're developing, they're growing, and they're really being molded, versus somebody like me. I could probably sit down and play a game that is going to be a little more aggressive, and it's not going to mold or shape my mind quite like it does with a child. But on the other hand, I'm often interested in why certain games are rated certain things. Just because it has a mature rating on it, there's times where I've almost felt like a teen-rated game was a little more inappropriate in certain respects than a mature game. And then you have this wide range of mature games that some are completely inappropriate and others are a little bit more tame. And so it's kind of an interesting situation where you're always trying to, number one, monitor what kids are watching on YouTube, right? Because they're watching these playthroughs on these video games. And then number two, what they actually end up playing. And I always find myself constantly trying to regulate. It's almost a full-time job, just trying to regulate what video games are appropriate and what video games aren't. To steer away from violence completely, I mean, 100 years ago, boys were beating each other up. It's true. I think sometimes some parents are a little too aggressive in trying to shelter the children, but on the other hand, I think we got to find a balance to remember that they are being molded and shaped.
It's probably helpful for you because you're a video game player. You're a video game player and you have been for years. So you have a good idea what's out there, how it's affected you, if it has or hasn't. So that's probably... Because some people have never played and they're like, well, I don't know what the kid's doing.
Yeah, right. And then there's also just, there's the aspect of sometimes just get them out. Get them outside. Yeah. Get them away from the screen altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other part of it is the proportion, like there's like how extreme is this, and then like what percentage of your life is video games.
Absolutely.
It's
not just about content.
Right. It's kind of what are the kids missing out on by spending too much time playing video games. So I mean, I was thinking about, as you're talking, like I don't love violence in video games, but I don't think it's detrimental necessarily. I mean, I think outside of, like, if that was their only source of input, then it could be, it could be pretty warping. But there's a part of like we used to, when I was in high school, my friends and I would go play, we'd go to a computer store and we'd set up a bunch of games and play against each other like late into the night. And the competition was great. That's just a medium, like whether you're playing football or sports or anything, like a medium for competition, like healthy competition where you can be respectful, like try your hardest, try to defeat the other person, but at the end of the day, be respectful and have fun. And I mean, it's, I guess I think sometimes the imagery or the violence or whatever kind of, it washes away at a certain point, because at the end of the day, you're competing with another person. And so if you're toxic in your competition, if you're a jerk and you're whatever, then that, regardless of whether you're playing in real life or playing on a video game, you can be toxic or healthy in that.
And I think the other thing that I also kind of try to balance is the violent inappropriate to the point where it's not even adding to the experience and actually taking away from the experience a little bit. Sometimes content can kind of enhance that experience some, but when you get to the point where it's just over-the-top violence, when there's gratuitous violence, where you're not building the character, you're not building the storyline, nothing is really helping you envelop into the video game. At that point, that's where I start to get a little frustrated, because it just
feels like they're doing it for shock value or marketing, or like, hey, we'll get you your attention with this really extreme stuff.
Movies are like that, aren't they? Yes, some movies are like that.
Yeah. I think that is from a psychological perspective, there's an importance in the guidance that comes with playing the video games, and in this case, it would be from the parent. I think there's a difference, and the kid needs to be told that there is a difference between video games and real life, just as there's a difference between your Nerf gun and growing up and learning to shoot a real gun. if you point your Nerf gun at your friend and shoot him, you can kind of say, no, you need to be careful with guns, but the reality is it's not going to hurt the kid. If you take them out to the shooting range, you're going to say, no, this isn't play anymore. You don't point it anywhere near anybody, because it's a life or death situation. I think it's the same with video games. You can separate your world of violence in the video game from your world of violence in the real world. And I remember when I was a kid, we used to play like colonization, where we colonized America. And in the concept of the game, you would go interact with the Native Americans, and you could either choose to be at peace or be at war with them, and the other colonies, the Spanish, the French, the English, and you could wipe out entire nations essentially. And if you think about that in concept, you're killing thousands of people at the click of a mouse. And I never thought about that when I was a kid, because it's just simple little graphics. But then there was Mortal Kombat, where you're just fighting one guy, but they actually showed blood. And I remember when that came out, there was such a panic among parents because it was visual, gory violence. And I think the difference is, it's like you said, there's a shock value. It's the difference between somebody getting punched in a PG movie versus somebody getting punched and bleeding everywhere in a PG-13 movie. And I remember movies that I watched as a kid that they had an impact on me because they were probably more mature than I was ready for. And I didn't go commit violence as a result of it, but it had an emotional impact, and I was thinking about it, and it would kind of mess with my sleep a little bit, and it creeped me out. And so there's definitely, because video games are becoming, like you compared it to making a movie, they're becoming more and more cinematic, some of the bigger games. And it's not pixels anymore. It's looks more like real life, and the visuals. You play Resident Evil, and it's scary. Like I played,
and that's the intention.
Yeah, I remember playing BioShock, and I was playing in the dark by myself, and I turned around, and there was a monster lady behind me, and I actually jumped, almost threw the controller because it startled me.
And I think one of the things that Darren said is there needs to be parenting behind it, or otherwise you're going to have problems. And the bottom line, parenting class 101, no matter what they're doing, no matter what era, 100 years ago, 200 years ago today, if there isn't that, there's going to be issues. Yeah, right.
Well, it's the same with, you said 100 years ago, boys were beating each other up.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. That should be regulated by a supervision, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right.
So that they understand where's the boundary, where's the line. Yeah, I can punch you, and it might be too far, but I can wrestle you, and it might be okay.
Yeah.
And I think kids need to know that. They need to be able to wrestle. And this is something Jordan Peterson said numerous times. You should wrestle with kids and roughhouse with kids so that they understand where that line is, so that they don't hurt anybody. They get what's play and what's aggressive.
I guess we've kind of turned into a parenting.
But that's what happens when you're a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. But, and then, of course, it goes without saying, every kid's a little different. I mean, Ethan, I have to monitor, my 12-year-old, I have to monitor like a hawk because his lines blur very, very easily between kind of what's real and what's not, versus my 5-year-old already. He's got a high level of intuition on kind of what's appropriate, what's real, what's not real. And so it's just two different kids, two different parenting styles. And that's the way kids are. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And that's part of it, as a parent, you don't really know. We had friends who, their kids are very sensitive to scary movies. Or like scary movies being like a PG Disney movie. And that's just, and it's like, we would, so if you have a kid who's very sensitive, you might say, oh, this is reasonable for them, and then they're scared by it. Well, then you learn, well, I'm going to dial it back, or, so you kind of have to, with each kid, you have to kind of see, your first guess might not be right, and then you might have to adjust, or I don't know. And the kid, every day the kids change, so you're like, I finally found it. This is the right, level of content that they can handle.
Don't go to bed that night.
Well, and then a year later, everything you knew is wrong, It's all changed.
Do you guys have maybe any closing topics we should go over? Anything that you would want to talk about? Do you have anything you want to talk about?
Oh, we were going to talk about benefits of video games.
Oh yeah, I did want to ask that.
Yeah.
That is something I'm interested in. As I would like to hear how I want to hear the positive, because we talked about some of the negative or possible negative. I would like to hear the positive. How do you think video games have benefited you? How have they, do you think you're smarter? Have they helped you with math? Have they helped you with social situations? Have they helped you meet people? I'm
Basically,
throwing out some ideas here.
I cited colonization as an example, and that was actually can be applied to this too, because it's a historical. It's kind of fictional because you could choose to do America, or you could choose to just discover some randomly generated nation. But the story is all there, and the Native American tribes are all there, and a lot of you can rename your colonies as you build them, but the original names, when you first set them up, by default, it would list them. And it's funny because I remember a lot of those more than I did my history books.
Yeah, right.
Another one was we had a game that I played when I was a kid about. It was called ZZT, and you could it had its own kind of internal programming language, so that you could design your own levels and design your own stories and program artificial intelligence into these little ASCII text characters. And so it gave me an understanding of both logic and programming on a very basic level, but it was still there. And it was all set up directionally with north, east, south, and west. And that got ingrained in my brain as a little kid. So now anytime I ever think of which way is north, south, east, west on a map, I go back to ZZT in my mind. That's hilarious.
How about you, Darren?
I think so. Again, with good parenting, like I loved video games more than anything in my life. You know, I would make an idol out of them. I would play them nonstop until I fell over dead, but you wouldn't let me. So
That's too bad.
So, and you know, it could be anything, like anything a kid loves. You know, the fact that you made me do it in moderation was a tool for me to learn, you know, like, this is fun, but you don't do it all the time. So that can be a good thing. Like, that's just parenting around something that child is interested in. But I think also when Evelyn was growing up, she's very not competitive, but she likes to win. She likes to succeed. And so I told her she had to play this video game with me and lose a lot because she didn't like to lose
over and over again.
Yeah, and it helped. Just like, look, you lost, the world didn't end. Look, you lost, the world didn't end. And we try, and it's a safe space to with repetition, be like, oh, it's like an introduction to the idea of losing in a very like kind of meaningless context where you're like, okay, this isn't so bad. And just it's opening conversation, and so that can be useful too.
Person with perfectionist tendencies, would you say, Evie? Do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely it's just a game. It's okay. Life isn't over. You know, you can keep going. Try again. You'll be fine.
That's good.
I mean, that was something we connected a lot on growing up. There's a game we played called Skylanders. And it was co-op, and we just they released every year they were releasing a new version of it. So when it came out, we'd play, you know, every weekend or every whatever. We just played together, and we did that for I don't know.
And you did the coffee money thing. You would every time you didn't get coffee in the morning, we would be able to get a new Skylander, and that
yeah,
we would save up money for Skylanders.
Yeah, it came with toys, so the toys would work with the game. So we would collect them. We'd go to the store. So anyways, and a lot of, you know, parents and kids, it can be a point of enjoyment and connection and something to just look forward to.
Ben?
I think there's a couple aspects of it that I think are really interesting. Some that I've found in myself growing up and still playing sometimes. And then also even my 12-year-old. The thing I find the most interesting is some of this collaboration playing that's going on is everybody has two thumbs. You know, everybody has, for the most part, 10 fingers. I shouldn't say ideally, but it's a very level playing field for competition to take place. Where a lot of times where there's competition in the past, it's you have to be physical, you have to be fit, you have to be a certain physique in order to compete and feel good about that and feel confident about that.
Yeah.
Ethan, my 12-year-old, plays some video games where one of them is there's 5 or 6 people and it's a Star Trek bridge. Right?
Yeah.
And they each take turns being the captain of the Enterprise.
Oh.
And it's really interesting just to listen and watch and hear him play.
And the rest all take other places on the ship. So you might be the comms officer or the weapons officer. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to hear him, I mean, really, after they played together for a while, and he's always playing with different people, but they start to click. And they start to work together, and then they're almost interpreting what before the person's even said it. They know what to do, and it's just cool to see them begin to work together. Where Ethan may not be very athletic, but he still is acquiring that ability to jump into a group of individuals and learn to collaborate and play and win as a result, and kind of what that feels like. Where I think there's a lot of kids that might have been left out otherwise if that didn't exist. And of course, there's always the argument that it helps with coordination. I've read a couple articles where it helps with memory and multitasking. Whether or not those are hopeful or wishful thinking, I don't know. But for me, it's always been a place to kind of just disconnect from life and kind of go into a different world and experience something different.
No stress. Takes this in. I don't have to think about school right now.
Even
I don't
as
have
a
to
kid,
think about.
I was always very, very concerned about being productive and moving forward and being aggressive in whatever I was trying to accomplish. And for me, I don't know if there would have ever been something different where it just gave me a place just to kind of disconnect for a little while. And it's actually kind of helped with some anxiety, some other things that, just mentally getting out of your own head. And I've always enjoyed that. But on the other hand, you do have to be careful that you don't live there.
Or you create anxiety in other people, like the wife or the parent. Yeah. As a parent, I'm going to throw out the benefit of a video game or even a board game. It is an opportunity for you to see somebody's personality come out because they have a lot more freedom in a game. Are they risk takers? Are they gamblers? Are they aggressive? Are they mean-spirited? Do they have a sense of cooperation? Are they able to lose and walk away and shake somebody's hand? Or are they going to throw a big fit? And I always thought that was any parent that their daughter was going to bring home a boyfriend, they need to have him come in and they need to play some family board games or some card games or some video games where they get to see the person win and see the person lose and see what happens, because that's them in real life. But it's an interesting personality revelation, I think.
Yeah. That is interesting.
Yeah.
And you can definitely even see that in the games and the way I choose to play. I'm always at the distance, the careful, the cautious, the quiet. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, these guys are very, very kindly sat down with us in this room. We got children in the background waiting for us to get out of here because they're... it's what are they doing in there? What are they doing? Why can't we come in there? And also, I think they got a game that they're planning to play. So
yeah, shocker.
So
we should also thank Archer, my 5-year-old, who sat at the window
and
watched peering in with for a half hour,
Why can't
hoping
I come
and
in?
wanting to.
I think that very thing gives us some insight into why they watch each other play video games.
They're looking in the window watching us talk about video games.
We've gotten to another level.
Yeah. So I appreciate, I appreciate you coming and sitting down with us and talking. It's been a good time.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun.
Oh, before we go, wait a minute. I'm going to give Darren a chance to advertise his company where he works and the game they're working on.
Our game is Ghost of Tsushima. You can watch. We'll have more at E3 coming up next week. Or if this is in the future when you're listening to this, some E3 in the past.
And you think your game will be out within the next year, maybe?
We haven't announced yet, but
we haven't announced yet. Okay.
Yeah, we're still
So,
working on it.
and also there's a trailer they could watch
There is a trailer out.
if they go to Sucker Punch.
You can search for Sucker Punch Productions,
Okay.
or PlayStation Ghost of Tsushima with a T.
Well, I was going to say, who's going to be able to spell that? Okay. Yep. Thank you very much, guys.
Yep.
And girl.
If you want to search online for the 2 Cent Table podcast, here are the places you can find us: Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. You can follow us on social media as well on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you have a topic idea for the show, if you'd like to be on the show, or if you have a way to connect us with some interesting potential guests, feel free to message us on any of our media platforms or email 2centtable@gmail.com. The 2 in that email address is TWO. And we'll consider your idea for future episodes. But that's all we have for this episode, so we'll see you on the next one.